I still remember the exact shade of the wallpaper in that office, the pale green with little golden vines that curled up toward the ceiling. The scent of polished wood mixed with something sharper, like paper that had been sealed away too long. My palms were damp, and I kept wiping them against my skirt, though it did nothing to calm the trembling inside me. It wasn't just a will reading. For me, it felt like walking into a room where my entire worth as part of this family would be weighed, judged, and likely dismissed. My Uncle Harold had passed only a month before, and though he'd been distant in his later years, he had once been the kind of man who slipped a peppermint into your hand when no one was looking, who made sure your bicycle wheels were pumped before you set off. I owed him kindness, loyalty, and respect. What I didn't expect was to be met with hostility before I'd even taken a seat. "You have no right to be here," my cousin Miranda said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the hush of the room. All eyes turned, and I felt heat climb into my cheeks. I could have argued. I could have raised my voice, reminded her that blood is blood, whether she liked it or not. But the weight of grief, of years of subtle exclusions at family gatherings, pressed down on me. I lowered my gaze instead, choosing silence. My hand brushed the scarf I wore, a simple, faded thing Uncle Harold had given me when I was 17. "For when you feel unseen," he had said. At that moment, I clung to it like a lifeline. The lawyer, Mr. Kent, shuffled papers with the deliberate calm of someone who had seen families unravel in rooms like this many times before. He looked over his spectacles, cleared his throat, and produced an envelope. A heavy one, sealed with the old-fashioned red wax Harold had loved for his letters. And as he broke the seal, I realized whatever lay inside would either confirm my cousin's words or change the course of everything I thought I knew about my uncle and about where I stood in this family. Because sometimes the truth arrives dressed not in thunder, but in quiet, deliberate revelations. I hadn't been invited to the mansion after Harold's funeral. Not once. The cousins had gathered there, Miranda, of course, and her two brothers, along with their spouses and children. Photos surfaced on social media. The sprawling dining table lit with candelabras, the laughter frozen in glossy pixels, the wine glasses raised. I was absent from every frame. It wasn't new. Growing up, my place in the family always felt conditional, like a chair pulled up only when someone else was late. My father, Harold's younger brother, hadn't made the same choices as the rest. He chose a modest life, teaching at a public school, while Harold built businesses, made investments, and collected homes in 3 states. That difference trickled down to me. Where my cousins had country clubs and summer trips abroad, I had library books and secondhand bikes. Still, Uncle Harold never made me feel lesser. When I'd visit him as a girl, he'd ask about my drawings, not my grades. He'd kneel down, eye level, and actually listen. He didn't care that I wore hand-me-down shoes. He cared that I was learning to lace them properly. But as the years passed, the distance grew. My father passed away when I was in college, and I drifted further from the family orbit. My mother moved overseas. Contact became irregular. An occasional card from Harold, always signed with his looping script, "Don't forget who you are." So when the letter from Mr. Kent, the lawyer, arrived at my tiny apartment 2 weeks after the funeral, my breath caught. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. "Your presence is requested at the reading of the last will and testament of Harold J. Whitmore." I almost didn't go. Part of me feared the humiliation, feared being dismissed again. But the scarf in my drawer, the one Harold had given me long ago, urged otherwise. It smelled faintly of cedar from being stored so long, but when I draped it around my shoulders that morning, it felt like armor. I walked into that paneled office, expecting little. A courtesy mention, perhaps. A polite nod to blood ties. Nothing more. What I didn't expect was Miranda's attack, or the lawyer's deliberate pause as his hand hovered over the envelope, as though he knew the words inside would change the shape of the room forever. Because sometimes, family history waits for one decisive moment to break wide open. The room seemed to contract as Mr. Kent opened the envelope, each rustle of paper louder than my own heartbeat. My cousins leaned forward, eyes sharp, as though the inheritance were prey they had been circling for years. I sat back, clutching the scarf in my lap, trying to steady my breath. Mr. Kent adjusted his glasses and began. His voice was calm, almost clinical, but the words carried a strange weight. "My dear family," he read, "if you are hearing this, it means I have left this world. I trust you are gathered together, though perhaps not in harmony." A small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Harold had anticipated this tension. He always did. The will was not a simple list of assets. Instead, it was structured almost like a letter, with instructions and conditions woven in. And then came the line that made Miranda shift in her chair, her nails tapping against the polished oak table. "I have left behind more than possessions," Mr. Kent read aloud. "I have left behind a test. Each of you believes you know me, but true inheritance is not measured in dollars or deeds. It is measured in character. To that end, what I leave shall not be granted at once, but revealed through steps. Only those who honor the spirit of family and demonstrate integrity will see the full measure of my gift." Murmurs erupted. Miranda hissed, "What kind of nonsense is this?" One of her brothers chuckled nervously, but I noticed his eyes gleaming with unease. The lawyer raised a hand for silence and continued. "Inside the study at my estate is a locked chest. The key is not hidden, but earned. Each of you will have the chance to contribute, to prove yourselves worthy in ways I shall outline. Consider it my final lesson. Should you fail to honor these steps, what remains will pass elsewhere, beyond this family. And then my name, my full name, spoken into the hushed room. I have entrusted my name with the first token. To her I gave it years ago, though she may not yet realize its purpose. She will begin the process." Every eye in the room turned toward me, some with disbelief, others with open hostility. My fingers clenched the scarf so tightly I felt the thread strain. Suddenly, a memory flickered. The day Harold had handed me the scarf, his voice soft but deliberate, "For when you feel unseen." Was this what he meant? The test had begun, and whether I wanted to or not, I was at the center of it. Because sometimes the quietest gifts turn out to be the loudest keys. The scarf trembled in my hands, as though it knew before I did. My cousins leaned closer, eyes narrowing like predators scenting weakness. "What token?" Miranda snapped, her voice edged with triumph, as if she were certain I'd come up empty. I unfolded the fabric slowly. It was worn, the blue faded to gray at the creases, but as I ran my fingers along the edge, I felt something I had never noticed before, a slight ridge beneath the stitching. My breath caught. With trembling hands, I tugged at the seam. A small object slipped into my palm. A brass key, no larger than my thumb, warm from years pressed against the fabric. The room gasped. I didn't know it was there. I stammered, though even as I said it, I remember Harold's words, spoken so many years ago with that peculiar gravity, "For when you feel unseen." Mr. Kent nodded, as if the moment confirmed something he had long expected. "The study awaits," he said simply. And so, for the first time in decades, I crossed the threshold of Harold's estate. The others trailed behind me, their whispers sharp, but the house itself silenced them. It was a grand place, yes, but not sterile like some wealthy homes. It bore Harold's character. Walls lined with books, bowls of polished stones he'd collected on travels, photographs tucked between silver frames. We entered the study. There, beneath the watchful eyes of oil-painted ancestors, stood the chest. Dark oak, iron-bound, heavy with age and mystery. The lock gleamed as though waiting. My fingers shook as I slid the key in. It turned with surprising ease. The lid creaked open, revealing not stacks of bonds or glittering jewels, but envelopes. Thick, sealed, each one labeled with a name. Miranda, Peter, Charles, and mine. Miranda lunged forward, but Mr. Kent's hand stopped her. "The envelopes are not to be opened here. Harold's instructions are clear. Each of you must read yours privately. Within lies both a task and a truth. Only when all tasks are completed may the estate be divided." The air thickened with tension. A test. Of character, of patience, of humility. My cousins looked ready to revolt, but I felt a strange steadiness rise within me. Harold had trusted me to begin this. He had chosen me, despite years of distance. Later, when I opened my envelope alone in the study, I discovered Harold's familiar looping handwriting. "Your task," it read, "is not wealth but witness. You must see what the others cannot, and hold fast to what is true, even when it costs you." And beneath those words, a simple drawing. A park bench beneath a tree, with pigeons scattered at its base. A puzzle, a place, and a promise. Because sometimes, the path to inheritance isn't paved in gold. It's hidden in the everyday, waiting to see who notices. I carried the envelope with me that night, as though it were fragile glass. The drawing haunted me, the crooked lines of the bench, the scattering of pigeons. It was unmistakably Harold Hand. I'd seen him doodle similar sketches on napkins during long dinners, half listening to conversation, half lost in thought. The next morning, unable to resist, I drove to the park near his estate. It was early, the grass wet with dew, and the air held that quiet before the city stirred. I walked until I found it, the very bench from the drawing. The paint was chipped, the wood weathered, but there it was, under a towering oak. And yes, pigeons pecked at crumbs around its base, just as in Harold's sketch. I sat down, scarf wrapped around my shoulders, and for the first time since his death, I let myself feel the weight of missing him. The silence pressed close, until a soft crinkle beneath me drew my attention. I slid my hand under the bench and found a small tin box, wedged between the slats. My pulse quickened. The box bore Harold's initials, etched faintly. Inside was a folded note and another key. The note was short. "You have always seen beyond appearances. This key will not open a door, but a truth. Guard it well. Others will seek to take it from you." My chest tightened. So it was true. Harold had orchestrated something larger than I'd realized. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. He had hidden layers of himself in plain sight, and somehow I was meant to uncover them. As I closed the box, footsteps crunched on gravel. Miranda's voice, cold and clipped, cut through the morning air. "So this is where he sent you." She stood with her arms crossed, her brothers just behind her. Their expressions weren't grief-stricken. They were hungry. And in that moment, I understood. They hadn't come to honor Harold's wishes. They had come to hunt whatever advantage they could. I slipped the tin box into my bag, heart pounding, as Miranda's eyes narrowed on me. Because sometimes, the real inheritance isn't about who deserves it. It's about who can endure the storm that comes when greed wakes up. From that morning on, everything shifted. The will reading had turned my cousins into competitors, but the park bench had turned me into prey. They began appearing everywhere. At the grocery store, in the library parking lot, even once outside my apartment late at night. Always by coincidence, always with the same practiced smile that didn't reach their eyes. They asked casual questions that weren't casual at all. So, found anything interesting lately? Harold always loved hiding things, didn't he? Each word laced with suspicion. I tried to brush it off, but the tension coiled tighter each day. At work, I caught myself staring out the window, scanning for their cars. At night, I kept the tin box under my pillow, as though its faint weight could anchor me. Meanwhile, each cousin had their own envelope to unravel. Rumors trickled back through family whispers. Peter had been tasked with mending an old rift Harold had left unresolved, Charles with restoring a charity fund their father had neglected. Yet, instead of approaching their tasks with humility, they grumbled, treated them like chores, or worse, like obstacles standing between them and Harold's estate. And then came Miranda. Her task, I heard, was to protect what was fragile. But instead of searching for fragility, she seemed intent on breaking mine. One afternoon, she cornered me outside Harold's estate. The scarf around my shoulders caught the breeze, and her eyes fixed on it with sudden recognition. "That old rag," she sneered. "You've had it since we were teenagers. Always flaunting it, like you were the favorite. What's hidden in it now, She reached for it, and I stepped back, my pulse racing. Her hand fell short, but her smirk told me the warning was clear. She suspected. She knew. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the scarf in my lap and Harold's second key on the table before me, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. What exactly was I being asked to witness? Was the true inheritance something tangible, or was Harold testing whether I could hold my ground against the people who should have been family, but now felt like adversaries? The scarf, once comfort, now felt like a target painted on my back. And the key, glinting in the low light, whispered of doors still unopened. Because sometimes, what we inherit isn't wealth, it's a battle we never asked to fight, but must endure to prove who we really are. The breaking point came on a stormy evening when Mr. Kent summoned us all back to Harold's estate. The tasks, he said, had reached their moment of reckoning. His voice was measured, but the look in his eyes betrayed the weight of what he knew was coming. The cousins gathered in the study, their expressions masks of impatience and entitlement. I sat apart, scarf draped loosely around my shoulders, the tin box and its second key tucked deep in my bag. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled above, as though the house itself braced for the clash. Mr. Kent laid out Harold's intentions once more. Each of you was given not merely a duty, but a chance to reveal your true character. Only those who honor the tasks will share in what Harold left behind. Tonight, we see where you stand. Peter muttered excuses about attempting reconciliation but being rebuffed. Charles bragged about writing a check to the charity fund, his tone dripping with disdain, as though generosity were beneath him. And Miranda leaned forward, her eyes glittering, and declared, "I know exactly what my uncle meant. Protecting the fragile means protecting this family's legacy from outsiders." Her gaze slid to me like a blade. The room grew taut with silence. I opened my mouth, but Miranda was quicker. She lunged across the space, her hand snatching at my scarf, tugging it violently. The fabric strained, threads snapping. Gasps erupted as the scarf fell open, and there, in the momentary flash of lightning, the cousins glimpsed the key I had hidden in the folds. "There!" Miranda shrieked. "She's been hiding everything, keeping it from us." The room exploded with voices, accusations flying like shards of glass. Mr. Kent's calls for order were drowned out. I clutched the key in my fist, my heart hammering, the truth pressing down on me. Harold had known this would happen. This was the storm he'd prepared me for. I stood, my voice trembling but loud enough to pierce the chaos. This isn't about money. It never was. It's about whether we can honor who he was, whether we can act with decency when it matters most. And all of you, you've shown exactly what he feared. For a moment, the thunder outside was the only reply. Then Miranda spat. "You'll regret this," her words low, venomous. But as I looked down at the key in my palm, I knew regret wasn't mine to carry. Harold had trusted me with this piece of him, and I wasn't going to let it be stolen by greed. Because sometimes, the real confrontation isn't against others, it's against the fear of standing alone. The storm raged well into the night, but inside Harold's study, something heavier than thunder shook the air. Mr. Kent, calm despite the uproar, motioned for silence. His hand rested on a leather-bound folder, untouched until now. "There is one final instruction," he said, his voice deliberate. Harold anticipated resistance, and he prepared for it. The last key was never meant to open a chest or a vault. It was meant to open this. He tapped the folder. Every breath in the room stilled. With unhurried precision, he unlatched it, revealing a stack of documents, Harold's own handwriting, his voice reaching from beyond the grave. Mr. Kent read aloud, "My estate is not to be measured in property or wealth. These things are fleeting, and I know well how they corrupt the heart. Instead, I have chosen to place my trust where it has long belonged, not in those who demand their place, but in the one who has lived unseen, yet with integrity." Miranda's face blanched. Peter shifted uncomfortably. Charles muttered under his breath. Mr. Kent continued, unwavering, "To my nieces and nephews who treated my tasks as inconveniences, you have revealed yourselves. To my name, who carried the scarf without complaint, who found the hidden key, who bore cruelty in silence. Your character is the true legacy. You alone inherit not only my estate, but my responsibility. May you guard it well, not for status, but for good." The words fell like stones into a still pond, their ripples widening through the room. Miranda shot to her feet. "This is absurd. She doesn't belong here. She tricked him." Her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through arrogance. But Mr. Kent shook his head. "The documents are binding. The estate passes solely to her." Harold was clear. "There is nothing to contest." Silence pressed in again, this time heavier. My cousins' faces were a portrait of disbelief, outrage, and something else. Fear. I sat frozen, the scarf slipping from my shoulders, the key warm in my hand. I hadn't sought any of this. I had only come to honor a man who once slipped me peppermints and reminded me I mattered. Yet here I was, holding the weight of an entire legacy. In that moment, I understood. Harold's gift was never the wealth itself. It was the chance to prove that humility and integrity, though often unseen, can outlast arrogance and greed. Because sometimes, the richest inheritance is not the estate you receive, but the dignity you refuse to surrender. The days that followed felt like waking into someone else's life. Papers to sign, properties to transfer, decisions to make, responsibilities that, at first, sat on my shoulders like lead. But as I walked through Harold's estate, room by room, I began to see what he had left me was not just material wealth. It was a trust, a story waiting to be carried forward. The scarf, though torn, I repaired by hand. It hangs now on a simple hook in the study, not as a symbol of riches, but as a reminder. Unseen threads often hold the greatest strength. The tin box and keys I locked away, not because they had value, but because they were part of a lesson a treasure map meant not for gold, but for truth. As for Miranda and her brothers, their anger cooled into silence. We no longer meet at holidays. Their absence aches, but not as much as their cruelty once did. I pray they find peace in their own lives, but I no longer carry the burden of earning their acceptance. Harold made sure of that. The estate, I chose not to keep for myself alone. I restored the charity fund Charles had ignored, expanded it in Harold's name. I reopened the gardens to the public, so children could wander among the oaks, just as I once had. And on Sundays, I sit on that weathered park bench with a bag of crumbs, feeding the pigeons. Sometimes strangers sit beside me, and I tell them a story about a man who tested his family not with riches, but with character. And when I leave, I always whisper to the pigeons what Harold once whispered to me: "Don't forget who you are." Because in the end, wealth fades, reputations crumble, but kindness, quiet, steady kindness, remains the only legacy worth protecting. If you've ever felt unseen, let this story remind you. Sometimes being overlooked is the very thing that makes you strongest. And when the test comes, as it always does, character will speak louder than any fortune. So tell me, if tomorrow you were given such a test, what truth would you leave behind?